I am going to share my screen so you can see my presentation, and there it is. And then we will go to the slideshow, share, slideshow. Okay. Enter full screen. Slideshow. Play from the start. There we go. We're ready to go. Am I good there, Kim?
You are. It looks great. I can see you and I can see your slides. So you're all set.
Awesome. All righty. So very happy to be here. I'm very happy to share some of the things that I'm going to. I've got a preamble up on the screen right now as to where some of this information is coming. It says within Indigenous culture, there's great diversity, and some of the presentations I've done previously speak to that. I do Indigenous 101 presentations, at least that's what we're calling them. However, there's also great similarity within that diversity, especially within ways of learning, knowing, and doing. These ways are always and have been gathered and preserved differently than settler culture. And respect it or not, certainly not the only right way, but our stories are our data, to speak in terms of some of the vernacular that they're kind of like saying intentionally, and the narrative and everything, all the buzzwords that people use these days. So what does that mean? Today, I share that which has been shared with me, so that it's either with my parents, my siblings, my friends, my community, my grandparents, elders that I've had the good fortune to interact with in every province, every territory, all through the States and throughout the world. In fact, I've been very fortunate in my life to have been able to have a lot of information shared for me from a number of different sources in a lot of different places. So my goal is to share some of those words and thoughts that would be starting points for your own reflection, your own inspiration and application, in your own way of learning, knowing, and doing. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. So the inspiration to seek collaborative solutions for addressing challenges, leading to a better future for all our children and beyond 7 generations into the future. And I will clarify some of those points as well. So there's what my presentation is called: A Holistic Approach to Physical Literacy, Developing Allyship in Today's Environment, Truth Reconciliation, Creating a Comfort Level for Cross-Cultural Engagement. And again, it's through stories, it's through that type of data stream that I am coming from today. And I will put my contact information up again at the end once I'm finished today. So got a question for you just to start with, and actually cheating a little bit, it's actually in behind me as well. So I want you to think about that. What is one of the most resilient substances you can think of? I suppose we could even put them in the chat box if you'd like. What is one of the most resilient substances you can think of? What do you think? And so as you're doing that, actually what I'll do is I'll give you a little bit of help. So I've just put on the screen a picture of water. That's actually the Grand River, which I call my river here in Southern Ontario. I'm south of Hamilton, smack dab between Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. And so on the left side of the jetty there, you've got the Grand River. And then this is where its mouth feeds into Lake Erie, which is to the right and beyond the lighthouse there. So to make it even easier for you, what is one of the most resilient substances you can think of within this picture? What would you choose? What would you choose? And if someone could unmic, is that possible, Kim or Thorsten, to unmic and just shout out what they think would be what they would choose as one of the most resilient substances they can think of? One of the substances. Okay, we got water, we've got rocks, we've got other people saying water as well. Excellent. A foundation, sure, absolutely. A resilient substance for sure. So again, so what did you choose? All righty. Some of you chose the rock, granite. Some of you may have chosen to step outside the box, because when I first initially asked you, I didn't show you the picture to be able to give you a point of reference. You may have stepped outside the box and said diamond. All good choices. For me, within that picture, the most resilient, oh, I've got an air, I've got a fire one too. Awesome. Thank you for sharing those pieces of information. But for me, it's water. Okay, water is one of the most resilient substances. Water will always find a way. And I want you to think about that leak in the roof that sometimes might happen in a building or a room or maybe your garage or maybe even your house. Hopefully not. Maybe a leak in the sunroof of your car. Think about. I'm going to take that back for a second. Think about if you've watched movies that have volcanoes, and when they can't stop the volcano, but the volcano stops when it hits the ocean. Water trumps the lava and is resilient enough and still retains its character as it stops the water. Water can actually get into rock and it can crack rock and break rock. Water is a very resilient substance. It will find a way. Okay. Maybe it should be included in a game of, and this is from my Star Trek nerds out there along with me, is rock, paper, scissors, Spock. And then maybe we should add water to that. Rock, paper, scissors, Spock, and water. We put it in a game of that because it would trump everything that's there. But water's life. You may have heard that terminology before. It's literal and it's figurative as well, but more on that later. Okay. What is physical literacy? And I'm sure this being a physical literacy conference that you've probably been inundated with a lot of information, and you probably may have already been familiar with that. Oh, sorry about that. So what is physical literacy? I'm sure you could answer. Physical literacy from an Indigenous perspective, tend to look at it more as a path or a journey, not really a destination. It includes these following technical elements, for which I'm certain, again, as I've mentioned, you've probably already become familiar or becoming more familiar with as you become more familiar with the terminology. Physical competence, variety of movements, wide range of physical activities and settings. And it's not just a physical activity. Okay. Physical literacy involves knowledge and understanding as well. Knowing the qualities that influence movement, understanding the health benefits, and knowing that that's why you want to be active. And then also along that, it goes into the idea of safety, because physical literacy is about wellness as well. It's not just these technical components and elements. What is physical literacy? It includes motivation and confidence in valuing, enthusiasm for, enjoyment of, self-assurance in adopting physical activity as an integral part of your life for your entire life. Engagement in physical activities for life. Freely choosing to be active on a regular basis, prioritizing and sustaining activity that is meaningful for life. Not going to spend a lot of time on that. Again, the conference has been about that, but hopefully that just adds a few more ideas to your picture, your holistic picture of what physical literacy is, can be, and can become as well. So how do you describe or explain holistic? Okay, when I'm saying that it's a little bit more of a holistic thing. So I want you to think about that just for a moment. Holistic. How would you do that? So I'll give you some help. A course that I helped was involved on the project advisory committee that was developed, and some of you may be familiar with it, is the Aboriginal coaching modules. They have a holistic model that is a composite of Indigenous communities that utilize the medicine wheel. But we did get the elders' permission or blessing to go ahead and develop a tool that is used within the Aboriginal coaching modules to discuss and illustrate what a holistic approach can be. Now, there are a lot of First Nation communities within the country who do not have a medicine wheel, but we use it as a conceptual piece. We also utilized it. It was developed by a gentleman that has intertwined, because we're talking about sport, the Olympic rings. And I think it does show the interconnectedness of all your aspects of being very well in that very simple graphic. You've got the physical aspect of your life. You've got the spiritual aspect of your life. You've got a cultural aspect. You've got a mental, emotional. It's similar to a wellness triangle. And in some communities, they might label their aspects a little different. But the other thing you really need to know about it is that each of these circles are exactly the same size. You don't need, or you should not be focusing on one exclusively. You don't silo things. They're all connected. They all affect one another. They do overlap with each other, and there's common ground as well. So there's a connection to all aspects of nature as well. It's not just these components of an individual, of a human being, but there's a connection within the lessons of the medicine wheel that relates to all aspects of nature as well. And a lot of times you'll hear that in either opening addresses, narratives that are being spoken, and they'll talk about all my relations. So that's all aspects of nature, not just the people. Holistic physical literacy. Aspects and relationships that I just talked about. The relationships, they're all connected. The aspects, there are several parts to you as a person. Your physical being is only one part. You have to be aware of all the other ones. In indigenous cultures, physical literacy is comparable to medicine. And when we talk about medicine, we're not talking about a chemical. You know, medicine can actually be a person that you go to and you get guidance, and they listen to you. Maybe it can be a person. It's anything that helps you sustain and heal you on a good path. That's what medicine is. In Haudenosaunee words, it affords the person the ability to carry the great peace. And that's something from the people that I'm part of. I'm Mohawk from the Bear Clan, Ganyokahaga people, the Mohawk people of the Flint. And we are a part of a larger group, the Six Nations of Haudenosaunee. Haudenosaunee is the people of the Longhouse. So we have what is called the Great Peace, the Great Law. Not Great Peace, sorry, the Great Law. And it's kind of our philosophical, spiritual guide, our constitution, I think, if you want to put it in English terms, similar to it. And carrying the great peace means a good mind, having a good mind and a good heart. And if you've got a good mind and a good heart, then you're doing well in all aspects of your life, and your life is in balance. And all the aspects of them are in balance. And you are in balance with all your relations as well. So a little bit more about holistic physical literacy. A good path is analogous to a river. So I said water is resilient. Water is very important. Water is life. And it's literally water is life, because we can't live more than a few days without it. We can go months or a month or more without food, but we cannot live very long without water. So water truly is life, literally. But water is also an amazing substance. It's also something that can be used to metaphorically. So water that's within a river. So a good analogy for physical literacy is a river and the water that creates and sustains it. A river is adaptable. If the soil conditions are rocky and a little bit steep, you've got rapids. I love kayaking, so about an hour north of here I go, and I will go into those conditions. The water is crystal clear. Down here where I live, the soil conditions are different. The terrain is different, but water still finds its way through, flowing through Arbor Forward in the river. It's a little bit murkier, a little bit slower, because the river bottom is clay. Water is adaptable. It adapts to temperature. It's amazing. Water sustains life and protects it through the cold winter temperatures, because it's the only substance in the world that actually, when it's in its solids form, has a density that is less than its liquid form. So that allows it to sit on top of water, and that forms a barrier to protect it and help the animals that live in that water. Water is adaptable to wind. It creates waves. It transfers energy. I love listening to waves. I consistently go back to a video that I did when I was on Haida in island on off the coast of northern BC, and the sound there of the water breaking, combined with the rocks that were on the seashore, had a crackle, and it made it almost like a song. I could have stood there forever. Well, not forever, but for a long time, listening to the sound of water adapting as the wind blew it into shore and the gravitational pull. Water is affected by the sun. It can warm. It can change its form and go not only to its solid form, it can go into its vapor form. Water is adaptable. And physical literacy needs to be that way as well. Rivers and waters will find a way. They're resilient. Physical literacy, you can find a way. It can find a way as well, so that it works the best for you. But it's not just a physical aspect. So physical literacy is like a river. If I paddle the river today, the conditions may vary tomorrow. Not exactly the same, but it's still a river. Not going to be exactly the same water either. Those water droplets, molecules have moved downstream, but there's still more. There's still more to retain the integrity, so that you can do different things within your physical literacy journey, and it can still be beneficial. If we do not move regularly, our bodies become unhealthy. If water stops flowing, it can become stagnant, and it can actually become unhealthy. It can actually be poisonous, stagnant water. So again, physical literacy is a conceptualization that you need to be like water. You need to continue to flow. You need to continue to move for better health. Rivers and water can be literal or metaphoric. I've already mentioned that from a previous slide. So in my title, I talked about, I'm going to compare a holistic approach to physical literacy and also include truth and reconciliation. Where does that fit? And then also, where does it fit? I will leave some of that to you to decide how that fits within your context and how it would then fit within the context of sport, recreation, and physical movement. So at this point, I want to focus on, when we talk about truth and reconciliation, why truth? What's the reason that we include that concept, that term, why truth, in truth and reconciliation? So if someone could unmute, be bold, and share a quick thought with me, that would be great. Or we can look in the chat box and see if we can get a quick response. I know I wouldn't be able to type a really quick response in it, but if you're bold, unmute, share a thought on why truth within truth and reconciliation. Do I have anybody that's being bold that would say why truth? Kim, I can't see the chat box. Is anything being put into the chat box?
No, not at this moment. Greg, you've asked a tough question. It might just take a few moments for people to really reflect on what they'd like to share.
I've got someone. It says to understand. Thank you, Cami. Megan, truth telling is the first step in being able to have honest conversations. Absolutely. Any other thoughts? You need truth in order to get to the R word. Sigglebeth, happy to hear you, seeing you on the call too. Absolutely. Truth is something the historical records of history may not always hold truth. So in order to that, we have to be able to establish that there's truth for the purposes to understand, for understanding. Truth telling is the first step. So then we're going to lead towards it. Absolutely. But what's the reason why it wouldn't be truthful? That's kind of the key thing here too. What's the reason that it would not be truthful? So, I've lost my window here.
We can still see you, Greg.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, you've got your.
You can still see my slide?
Yeah, I can still see your slide.
Yeah. Oh, I've lost my slide here. I've lost my place. Just give me a second here. My screen is paused. Resume share. There. Okay. All right. I'm good. Alrighty. I'm back. Sorry for that technical. All right. So let's go through a couple of quick little exercises here that will maybe help us to figure out why possibly the truth may not have been exactly where it needed to be. So take a look at the screen. What are you seeing? What do you see? Are you seeing the double image? Are you seeing, is it changing back and forth? Megan said history has largely been framed through a colonial lens. Absolutely. Yes, two faces. Yes, changing. Can you stop it from changing? Can you make it be only the head-on view perspective, or can you make it stay in the profile? Give it a try. I'm having some challenges here. I keep losing my screen. My apologies here. Can't seem to get rid of. I think I'm freezing here, unfortunately.
I know that your looks like your internet is going from red to yellow, Greg. So I'm wondering if it might be better for you if you turn your video off. As long as we can hear you, that's the most important thing, right? So maybe give that a try and see if it helps.
Yeah, I will. I'll look at my video here and get it turned off. Because as I said, my screen keeps freezing on me here. Nope, no, I can't get the controls up here. Mute my audio, stop my video, stop my video. Okay, so is my picture off?
I can still see your truth picture, and I can see your name, but I can hear you very well, which is good.
Okay, so is my screen still showing?
It is.
My
yes.
PowerPoint. Okay, yeah. Excellent. All right, so we're good. Okay, once again, apologies. So truth, life is all about how we see things. Yes, the lens at which settlers looked at things was quite different than what we looked at things. So in this case, what do you see? What do you see in this image here? Can you call out the chat box for me, please?
Yes, of course I can. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just waiting for people to type in what they see. Mm-hmm. I see just the profile of a head. Mm-hmm. Thorsten says face of an Inuit person. Jamie says someone looking at a rock or a rock. Mm-hmm. Either the side profile of a head or a guy with a parka with a spear. Oh, yes, I had not seen that. My gosh, Megan, now I'm seeing it. Mm-hmm. Tracy says, can see the indigenous face and the Inuit person over a seal hole.
Yes.
Wow.
Or looking into a cave, possibly an Inuit.
Yes.
Inuit.
Possibly.
Inuit person, yes. Or a First Nations person. Absolutely. So we tend to see, in some cases, differences or the familiar first. And based on our focus and perspective, respectively, some unconscious bias can come in with the differences or the single story because what we're familiar with. We sometimes will miss similarities or ignore the unfamiliar. But that does not make it any less true. So our focus, our perspective, our experiences, whether they're positive or negative, sometimes will affect our truths. We may have no experience in it, so now we're uncomfortable. We may have only a single experiences, and that's where you get into stereotyping. You may not even have experiences. You've listened to somebody else's experiences. And so the opposite side of this coin, though, of what we tend to see when we look at things, when we make a decision about them, is the opposite of knowledge isn't ignorance, it's mystery, it's wonderment, it's possibility. And that actually quote came from a TED Talk, The Beauty of What We'll Never Know. And so it's the idea that the opposite of knowledge should not be ignorance. There's no need. You just have to have that wonderment. You have to look forward to that possibility. You have to be resilient in moving forward, even in the face of being uncomfortable. So that's kind of, again, the theme of the conference. So some food for thought here. From my perspective, anytime a person becomes aware of information that may not fit their understanding, it may not fit their ways of knowing and doing, what do they do? What they do next can be really impactful and more than they realize. And that's especially true with historical beliefs. Do they dismiss this new information or the stuff that doesn't quite fit their way of knowing and understanding? Do they ignore it and then just move on without further action? Do they challenge the information, look to correct it by attempting to change the perspective of others to their right way of thinking or understanding? Do they accept it? Do they change their own perspective? And do they attempt to maybe even change this perspective of others? And finally, for me, this is the real thing that it should do. Does it motivate them to find out more? Does it create that curiosity rather than being in that realm of ignorance, which is just the opposite of not having knowledge? Unfortunately, ignorance tends to be a negative word. Oh, don't be so ignorant. No, it's the ignorance in its true meaning is just that you don't know. You don't have the knowledge. You may not have those experiences, as I had put in a couple of slides back. You may have no experience. You may have limited experience. Different ways of knowing and doing. So you take your ways of knowing and doing, and you have certain expectations because of the experiences that you've had. You have different experiences. And expectations on both sides of a situation, especially if you have differences, can be violated. What does that mean? What does violated mean? Well, in the positive, you can say, well, I was really pleasantly surprised. I was hesitant. I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure what this Henhawk guy was going to talk about. Hopefully you're pleasantly surprised by the time we're done. You may be hesitant to try something new. You eventually do, maybe a food, maybe an activity, maybe you go bungee jumping, maybe you go kayaking down some whitewater, and you become pleasantly surprised that something that you thought wasn't going to be positive was. You thought maybe it would be negative. Maybe it would be something you like. Even if you did not like it, that's okay. In the opposite, and this is more the negative, unfortunately, you can feel uncomfortably challenged because your expectations have been violated. Okay? And I think that is some of the things that happened to the settlers when they came over and they saw such a difference. And it wasn't just a difference in appearance, it was a really big difference in philosophy. Difference in the way that Indigenous people conducted their ways of doing things. They conducted how they did things, their practices, their traditions, their way of knowing, and the way of governance even was very probably uncomfortable for Europeans who had a very different system. Does it make you angry and defensive? Some people get very angry and defensive when their expectations get violated. And they have a very difficult time to now hear the side that might even inform or possibly get them to think about something and look at it a little bit differently. And it could also be that your expectations get violated by all the above and even more. And so we're going to delve into some of that too a little bit more in the next few slides. Not going to play this video, but I do always bring it up because I think it's one of the most apropos. It fits the discussion of truth and reconciliation so well. It fits the discussion of racism, discrimination, unconscious bias. It fits all of these things. I would encourage you to take the time, take a look at this particular TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story. What you perceive is based upon experiences. The lady that's speaking in this TED Talk, Chimamanda, she says, if we hear only a single story about another person, people, or a country, we risk a critical misunderstanding. First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people are and always have been more than just a frozen Hollywood Indian in time that goes around saying ugh and wears war paint and grunts kimasabi and how. But there has been a single story that has been portrayed of Indigenous people throughout history. And it has not been a good one. It has not been a good one. But again, an incredible video with some incredible insights and food for thought, which again is the point of stories. You're not being told necessarily what to do, but you're at least asked to consider alternatives. Look at something from a different perspective. Add this experience to yourself. And it doesn't mean you have to change everything about yourself. Another thing, a couple of things that are mentioned by Chimamanda is that she says, stereotypes are not untrue, but they're incomplete. Because again, you may have a limited experience, a limited story. Emphasis on differences rather than similarities prevents a balance of stories, but yet nature needs to be balanced. I had mentioned that with the aspects in the medicine wheel. What you perceive, what you believe is based upon experiences, upon your stories. What are your stories? Who are you? What's your story? Something else for you to look at. You may not be familiar because your perceptions and how you perceive is about what's familiar to you. So if you look at this series of pictures in rows, some of you might start already getting it without me giving you some hints. This is actually a song. It's actually the sounds and then the lyrics for a sound. And so I'll give you a moment to maybe throw in the chat box again about what song this is, if you've got it. I'd love someone to unmic and actually do the actions and maybe sing out the song, but I don't know whether anybody's that bold. And Tracy Hillis says she's heard this one before. Oh, you're hearing all my material before, Tracy? We Will Rock You. Absolutely. But if you're not familiar with some of the images in the picture, you will not know what's being said. I am wondering if my mouse is running out here. I don't know. I'm frozen again. Okay. All right. So if you're looking at the top row, you've got a fist pounding on the desk. So boom, boom, clap, boom, boom, clap. The we command module there. Will Smith, we will rock you. Okay. We, the rock, and you. Absolutely. But if you weren't familiar with these actors, you may not be able to get it. If you weren't familiar with the with a Wii console, you may not be able to get it. If you had not been familiar with the beat of "We Will Rock You," I can't imagine that though, but I mean, I guess you may not have known. Another one, what you perceive is also based upon perspective. I'm sure you've seen something similar to this, or experienced some of this, or even heard stories, or even had a situation where you've been blindfolded and asked to, what do you think this is? So you've got all these different perspectives because everyone's has a blindfold on. It's a fan, it's a wall, it's a rope, it's a spear, it's a snake, it's a tree, depending on what part of this massive animal you are exploring at any one given time. This image comes from, and I borrowed it from the global mental health movement, and there's the reference for it. And it's titled "Many Different Perspectives, but Not Enough Sharing." So that in this picture, when you go back to it, all of these people could be so differently, completely on a different page if they don't communicate their perspective. They've got their perspective from where they're exploring this elephant, and they would all have maybe a conflicting argument, maybe even an argument over what an elephant is. Okay, very possible. So what you perceive is based upon past experience, or even your present experience, and this perspective that which you are going to be looking at it from. Our life experiences give us each unique perspectives. So again, I've got a quote later on in my presentation, but I love the quote. It's by Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, and he says, you're basically setting you up for conflict or failure or problems if you assume that everyone's experiences are exactly the same as your own. And when you find out they're not, you think that they should be. And I think that's kind of the mentality, the ideology sometimes that explorers took. They were expecting to, they were definitely expecting to find differences, but once they found those differences, they really wanted to turn everything back to their own perspectives. If we don't talk and explain our vantage points, we will never understand one another. What's an elephant? Right, I don't know. You're going to get so many different perspectives here if you don't communicate, if you don't explain, if you don't share with each other. So dialogue, relationship building, all of that is incredibly important to get everybody on the same page or in the same room. Maybe is there an elephant in the room that's not being talked about? So too often, going back to Chimamanda, single stories of Indigenous people exist. Too many single stories of Indigenous people exist. There's been a voice that's been missing. We haven't had a voice. Indigenous people haven't had that voice. And the stories have been missing. Our data, the way that we preserved and kept our data, our wisdom, our ways of doing, our ways of knowing has not been out there. Okay, I'll take a moment just before this particular slide, truth and reconciliation. What is reconciliation? Does anybody have any comments to what's been presented to this point? Any questions, comments? Again, I can't, that's silly chat.
I will let you know, Greg, if there's anybody that shares in the comment box here for you.
I've gone fairly quickly since I've got less time than I may have had. I do apologize if I've been babbling a little bit too fast.
No.
Any comments, any questions?
It's been really interesting, Greg. I think what you've been sharing with us is very important. Just to give a few more moments to add some thoughts to what you've shared to date and what is reconciliation. No one yet has volunteered.
And again, reconciliation is going to be different depending on your perspective, different perspectives. It'll take different forms. It's going to be like water. It's going to adapt. But the process does move forward. So that's the river this time. Again, river and water is an important analogy, metaphorical guide and connection with nature for sure. Okay, I'll move on. So you've had a chance probably maybe to read what's on the screen. And these points come from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. That's TRC, if you're not familiar with the acronym. So reconciliation is about establishing and maintaining a mutually respectful relationship. The terminology of the day was Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal peoples in this country rather than Indigenous, non-Indigenous. In order for that to happen, there has to be an awareness of the past, truth, acknowledgement of the harm that has been inflicted. Again, the truth of of how those actions affected not only the generation historically, or also still impacts today. And then atonement for the causes and actions to change the behavior. That's from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Reconciliation, though, when you start thinking about it, though, and I think people get focused on this way too much, reconciliation encompasses way more than just the atrocities of residential schools. The TRC, Truth and Reconciliation Commission, focuses on the residential schools, but there is far more than that. It's about restoring respect by non-Indigenous people for Indigenous peoples. They're diverse and different peoples, but not less. Okay. And in reality, I also believe that it's a two-way street. There needs to be restoring respect for, again, in reverse of that. Okay. So it's not respect by non-Indigenous people. There needs to be respect by Indigenous people for, again, the good people from the non-Indigenous community as well. It's about creating and restoring trust by Indigenous people for our non-Indigenous relatives. Note the word relatives. We must return to our true self and the concept of family. 500 years ago, pre-settler, pre-Europeans, what were Indigenous people? They were family. They were connected. There was diversity all across Turtle Island, but there was still a connection where they helped one another. Other thoughts on truth and reconciliation? From your perspective, what are some barriers to reconciliation? So, we've been on this path even for a longer period of time than really most people would even understand, because of the fact that reconciliation has started as things occurred, as we became known as people. When I say we, Indigenous people, we weren't considered people until 1951 in the Constitution, or the British North America Act, the Constitution of Canada. We were not considered a people. What were you considered then? Well, we were just Indians, and that in reality actually was less than animals on a scale if you were to do that. So from your perspective, I'd love if someone would throw in the chat box, what is a barrier, even something that you believe is, what's some of the things that's preventing reconciliation from moving forward? Any thoughts? And I know it's a biggie, and I know it's late in the day too already.
All right, you've got one person. Thorsten's already said communication is a barrier.
Thanks, Thor.
Jamie is saying, for me, it's building relationships, listening and holding space, and then building further on those relationships. I often hold back because I don't want to say the wrong thing.
The wrong thing here. Oh, that's what you're saying. Okay.
Yes,
absolutely.
That's what Jamie just said. Yes.
Yeah, that's that discomfort for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. That's the discomfort that is a barrier within this whole process. And it's a discomfort on both sides. It really truly is a discomfort on both sides. Actually, I had an incredibly long conversation with a friend that we haven't spoken in over a year because of COVID, partly, and because of some other issues too. She became a new mom, so she's always very, very, very busy. But we had a long 4-hour conversation last night, and part of it was the idea that we were going through her company's land acknowledgement. And they've melded a land acknowledgement along with a vision statement that goes along with them trying to also apply a call to action. And within that conversation, there was that same thing. We don't want to do the wrong thing. We don't want to be, we want to make sure that what we do is right. And again, I've got this in my presentation. Somewhere else is what, or further on, the idea that within many Indigenous languages, there really isn't a word for right. And that's why the conceptualization is good. Okay, what's the good thing? What's a good thing to do?
I've got a few more comments here, Greg, just so you know. Tracy is volunteering that barriers could be apathy or indifference and absence or lack of emotional attachment.
Mm-hmm.
And then Kristen said, to build off of Thor's ideas, I would say education and consultation are barriers.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Okay. All righty. I am frozen once again. I just turned off some other things on my screen here to see whether that will help.
Okay.
I'm having some challenges here.
That's okay. You're doing great despite the challenges, Greg.
Well, again, I have to be like water, correct? I have
That's
to be,
right. That's right.
I have to. Okay. Where is it? Where did it go? Ah, I'm back.
Perfect.
All right. So we're past that. From your perspective, what are some barriers to reconciliation? We've already got that. So from my perspective, more times than I can count, and more times than the Fibonacci numbers, you know, if you're familiar with math, and again, being like a math geek, like a Star Trek geek like myself, Fibonacci numbers, yesterday was 2, 22, 22, or depending on how you say your date, it was actually 22, 2, 22. Anyway, I can babble on more about math too, because I love thinking, and that's really what math is. Math is thinking. But anyway, I've heard these comments. When asked about the idea of, again, what are barriers? How come truth and reconciliation isn't further along? Most people would say, I don't know how to start. What's the barrier to, I don't know how to begin. I want to help. I don't know how to begin. I want to engage. I don't know how to do it. I'm frustrated. In some cases, that frustration can be from the Indigenous people as well. Remember that this is a two-way street. I'm frustrated, or I'm angry. After delivering a course that I deliver with in conjunction with Sport for Life, Indigenous long-term participant development, and we do the blanket activity, there are people, non-Indigenous people, who are saying, I'm ashamed of our country. I'm ashamed of our country's past. I'm angry with some of our forefathers when they find out some of the things that come and are revealed within the interactive blanket activity and discussions. And I'm sure that people were angry when the the bodies of children were discovered at residential schools. So all of those things are barrier. But the number one thing that I get is, I'm just not comfortable. I'm just not comfortable doing this. I'm just not comfortable on this topic. And it is a difficult topic. Absolutely, it's a difficult topic. But we need to be able to move beyond that and start creating that communication, that trust, that getting inside the comfort zone rather than being outside our comfort zone. So what perspective or knowledge is needed to be inside that comfort zone, to be inspired to action? And as I've already mentioned, the road to reconciliation. And for me, the term inclusion, I'm not a fan of the term, but I am definitely in a fan, and I'm 100% on board for the concept of what inclusion is meant to be. The difficulty sometimes is inclusion then sometimes means getting rid of the diversity, because now everybody becomes one. Yes, you can band together for an event or something and become one, but then you still should retain your distinctiveness, because there isn't one tree around the world. There isn't one animal that exists in the world. There isn't one only within the entire world. There isn't one climate. There isn't one landscape. There's diversity. There's difference within nature, and it balances itself, and it gets along, and it finds a way, just like water finds a way. So it needs to be a two-way street, not just a one-way street. Allyship, talking about that, put that in my title. I'll just read this out. It's a quote from an Anishinaabe, Ojibwe in English, Elder Mary Deliri. She spoke at a traditional knowledge keepers forum, I believe it was in Winnipeg actually, about the shared responsibility of both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. I'm filled with belief and hope, because when I hear your voices at the table, I hear and I know the responsibilities that our ancestors carried are still being carried, even through all the struggles, even through all what has been disrupted. We can still hear the voice of the land. We can hear the care and love for the children. We can hear about our stories, our governance, our feasts, our medicines. We have work to do. That work we are already doing as Indigenous peoples. Our relatives who have come from across the water, non-Indigenous people, you still have work to do on your road. The land is made up of the dust of our ancestors' bones. And so to reconcile with this land and everything that has happened, there is much work to be done in order to create balance. There needs to be that balance. There doesn't need to be all the time one way, one unified, non or homogeneous people, because there's strength in that difference. There's strength in that we balance each other out. Allyship in the Haudenosaunee Great Law of Peace, I've mentioned it earlier. The Great Law transferred the nature of family to generously embrace strangers, difference and diversity, to take in outsiders by adoption and welcome. The great white roots below the tree of peace not only spread the great law over the earth, fostering a landscape of peace, they also encourage the people who are touched by them to become part of the family of peace. This is what we had become and moved on to as Europeans arrived here. We were peaceful people. This translates into a civic rather than an ethnic society. Family means support, responsibility, and mutual aid. They help one another. All my relations, I mentioned it previously, describes a dynamic two-way relationship. It means reciprocity. The concept would link all the natural world to all the human world. They help one another. In some indigenous language, the term for plants translates to those who care for us. Plants could live quite comfortably without us, without human beings. We cannot live without plants. I think, again, the arrogance of humanity sometimes, of humans, forgets that and thinks that they need to try and control and fight nature. They all always want to swim upstream in a river. Within a village and community, people experience kinship as not only the way to peace and stability, but also as cooperation. Collaboration is probably even a better word there. I've had intended to change that, but I think cooperation works. Cooperation, collaboration, kinship, working together, helping one another. Humans should not fight or try to control nature. They should flow with it. Interpretations of the Great Law that comes from the Great Law. More Haudenosaunee Great Law. Peacemaker created a way through the great way for the great white roots of peace, through the great white roots of peace, such that any person or nation the Haudenosaunee encountered in the world would have a way to become a relative and become part of the great peace. The concept of balance with the great law suggests that tasks are rarely, if ever, assigned to one individual. Always at least two. You don't do it alone. You need to work together. In Haudenosaunee history, we speak of the great partners, the two great partners, which is the peacemaker, the Ganawida, who brought down the great law from the creator, and Hiawatha, who spread the word. I'm sure that most people have heard of Hiawatha, and he is within the Haudenosaunee people and was involved in this spirituality, this ways of knowing and doing. Allyship, again, a big focus. I think that's really key. Working together needs to be understood that, like in the natural world, rivers and water are life. Both literally and metaphorically, the world flows. Time and space flow, and relationships should flow as well. The people who are alive at any one time are simply part of a larger people, one that includes those who have gone before and those who will come after, those who we have not yet seen 7 generations into the future. Our differences, our changes, the things that we are going to collaborate and create together might be a small step, it might be a small piece in a very big picture. Generational change is needed. It's going to take time. We have to have the patience and the wisdom to know that the changes that we make, whether it's in our everyday lives, whether it's in sport, whether it's in the way that we do things, will make a difference if we have a good mind and a good heart. Our brothers in the East Coast, this comes from the Mi'kmaq on the East Coast, and they have a concept they've created, El Nue. El Nue is as much a path as it is a process. It's about people coming together with a shared vision focused on a better, brighter, more prosperous tomorrow. I don't know any human being that doesn't want that, and they don't want that for their children. It's about Mi'kmaq and non-Indigenous people collaborating and working together to build stronger, more vibrant communities. Most of all, El Nue is a promise that together we can go anywhere. And that includes in every aspect of our life, whether it's physical literacy, whether it's physical, mental, emotional support, spiritual support, respecting for the diversity, the differences that we're going to have, and also communicating to learn those new perspectives or having those different perspectives, and also appreciating that we will have differences, and that's okay. The good path: to acquire knowledge, one must study, but to acquire wisdom, one must observe and experience. Martin Luther King Jr. said, we must learn to live together as brothers and sisters or perish as fools. We must experience together. We help one another. There is work to be done on both sides. That's my own little interpretation and version there, if I could be so bold. Change and trust. Change can only happen at the speed of trust. A book by Stephen Covey, The Speed of Trust. Unfortunately, he focused mostly on business, but it's good words. With respect to reconciliation, with respect to relationships, we help one another. How do we change the discomfort? I'm saying that rhetorically right now. How do we create that trust? That's for you to create in your own context, in your own way, because if it comes from your heart and it's meant to be respectful, then it's a good way. And that's where you can get into it. I don't know how to start. I don't know how to do the right thing. No, it will be the right thing if it comes from your heart and it comes from a place of respect and trust. Change and allyship. Change requires a good mind and a good heart. I've already mentioned that. Changing ourselves, we should look inwardly first. In the settings where we live, work, and learn, and see what small changes. Sometimes we can't make the big changes that are going to make the big impact right now. That's where the patience comes in. That's where the decisions and the changes that we make, we have to be confident that 7 years, 7 generations down the road, it will be even better. Utilize successful existing approaches and always search for new ways of thinking that we can all build on. There are good approaches out there. There are good words from every culture, from every spirituality, from every religion. There's good advice. We need to heed it. We need to know it. We need to understand it, appreciate it. We don't necessarily have to adopt it in its present form. You don't have to change that drastically. Indigenous worldviews include concepts and specifics, but one never cancels out the other. Holistic is big picture conceptualization, but without the specifics, it wouldn't exist. It wouldn't balance out well. So there is a mix of and a balance of concepts and specifics. But first and foremost, Indigenous worldview looks at it way more holistically than settler ideology, I believe. Unconscious bias. I'd mentioned this way back 55 minutes ago when I started talking. There's an amazing book you'll see here on the screen in green. Unconscious bias can be at work without our realizing it, and even when we genuinely wish to treat all people equally. Ingrained stereotypes can affect our visual perception. That's basically, again, what the visual things that I showed you at the beginning. Sometimes you can't even stop it. That image of the gentleman facing forward and then being in profile, it would flip back and forth. It flips back and forth, back and forth. Attention, memory, and behavior. So great book if you get a chance to grab it. Not something you necessarily even have to read cover to cover for it to be incredibly beneficial. I consistently go back to it and read pieces. A quote that I came across on one of my Instagram feeds was, no matter how open-minded, socially conscious, anti-racist I think I am, I still have old, learned, hidden biases that I need to examine. It's my responsibility to check myself daily for my stereotypes, prejudice, and ultimate discrimination. You know, it's very difficult sometimes. You can't stop what you feel. You also can't even stop what you think, but how you act on those feelings, how you act on that thinking is what you can control. Change, what can we do? We need to look in the mirror and also encourage all, oh, that's the same slide here. I'll move on. What is the reason people think the way they do in kind of going along with Eberhardt's question? And I had mentioned this about Søren Kierkegaard too. I actually had a friend that had met a few years back, and then about 2 years later, after we were having a discussion, she said, I can't believe that you actually are reading and quoting a Danish philosopher. And I said, why not? Wisdom comes in many shapes and forms and come from many sources. It doesn't have to only be from me or only from Indigenous people. There are good words out there from everyone, because again, we are all connected. There are two ways to be fooled. One is to believe what isn't true. The other is to refuse to believe what is true. And again, that comes in and is part and parcel of that concept of truth and reconciliation. Also, in further writings, he concluded that conflicts arise when you assume all people's reality or life experience are the same as your own. And when you discover they're not, you believe they should be. And that's where you start to change and want everybody to be exactly like you. It is beyond unfortunate that in the past, European worldviews differed so greatly from Indigenous peoples that no common ground could be found, and in many ways still has not today. I'm really hoping that, again, forums like this, discussions like this, sharing of words like this will change that, and I believe it will. A quote coming from, as you can see at the bottom there, Adam Kahan: our typical pattern of listening is difficult. Situations are tactical, not relational. We listen for what we expect to hear. Again, we sometimes held a little bit hostage to our past experiences and then what we feel or what makes us uncomfortable or makes us comfortable. We sift through others' views for what we can use to make our own points. We measure success by how effective we have been in gaining advantage for our favored position. Many people do not listen to understand, they listen to win. They want to win the conversation rather than just integrate it and think about it. And again, there doesn't have to be an absolute change, but understanding someone else's viewpoint, someone else's perspective, that's what's valuable. Single stories of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. We talk about diversity. I get this all the time. You mean there isn't one Indigenous language and culture? And again, that's a whole different talk on a collective term for Indians, for First Nation, for Aboriginal, for Indigenous. Just to illustrate that point, how many First Nations can you name? Well, there's 687 recognized First Nations community within Canada. That doesn't include the Métis. That doesn't include the Inuit. How many First Nation languages are there? Well, if there's 687, how come there's not 687 languages? Well, there aren't. Well, that seems kind of strange. I had a comment from someone at a presentation once, and I said, well, how many English-speaking countries are there in the world? There's all kinds of different countries that have different customs, different ways of knowing, different ways of doing, and they all speak English, or they all speak, or there are countries that will all speak French. So you can share a language, but you can still be a different nation. You can still have a different custom. There's approximately 55 root languages within Canada, and then these numbers are for Canada only. If you included the United States, it would be even far greater. And each one of these diverse First Nations, during one circumstance, believe themselves to be in a country, a nation. Reconciliation is holistic. You've got this call to action, 87. It's within the sport and recreation realm. We call upon all levels of government in collaboration with Aboriginal people, Sports Hall of Fame, and other relevant organizations to provide public education that tells the national story of Aboriginal athletes in history. We need a balance of story like nature is balanced. Like Chiamanda mentioned, is the idea that you need a balanced story. You can't just have a single story. It creates an imbalance that is dangerous, and you can make critical mistakes. So having said that, even if you're in the sport and recreation field, you should be aware of some more of the calls to action. And that's important. I don't think it was intentionally siloed. I think it was a way of, again, some people will think a particular way. They're comfortable absorbing information in a certain way, and it's divided up into usable chunks, manageable chunks. Call to action number 1 that a lot of people maybe not even know about. Subsection 5, we call upon the federal, provincial, territorial, and Aboriginal governments to commit to reducing the number of Aboriginal children in care by requiring that all child welfare decision makers consider the impact of the residential school experience on children and their caregivers. And I think that goes way beyond just childcare. Within the sport and a recreation realm, within physical activity, within physical literacy, you should be aware of the impact of what that has done. And then also it doesn't excuse behaviors, possibly protest and anger and frustration, but it allows you to have a starting point to say, okay, I understand. I still want to help. I do want to help. How do we make change a two-way street? Well, a book by a Harvard anthropology professor. There was actually a TV series of videos that are made out of it. It's not an easy read, but there's some amazing, incredible tidbits in this book, Millennium Tribal Wisdom in the Modern World. I love the book. It talks about so many different Indigenous cultures around the world. And a quote from David Mayberry Lewis is, "There are no instant solutions to our dilemmas, but the first step is to understand them. In order to understand them, we have to communicate. We have to partner. We have to relate." Communicating, talking is an action, but it's not, you don't do actions in isolation. It's a holistic picture. You need to have these communications on at the same time as there are actions that need to go on. I cringe a bit when people say, well, enough talk, we need to do actions. Well, again, you can be talking and continue the dialogue at the same time as you are doing concrete actions to address the challenges that have arisen because of the history of reconciliation, the history of treatment of Indigenous peoples, the history of residential schools, or even day schools, which some people don't really know about. On the other side, Indigenous people, healing journey needs to, I wouldn't say accelerate because it still has to go its own pace, but the healing journey, where they are, returning to who we are as people, who we were before settlers arrived. There's work to be done on both sides. Where do we go from here? Changing ourselves in the settings where we live. Work and learn requires working and learning towards is a good mind, a good heart, and a commitment to a good path. And you might be getting a little tired of hearing that, but it's true. To acquire knowledge, one must study. To acquire wisdom, Oh, again, I've got similar things in here, but this middle one, difficult conversations must be had. Difficult conversations must continue. Difficult conversations must inform without blame or alienation. No shame, no blame, no revenge is a tenet of the great law. The great law says, even though you feel sadness, even though you want to get restitution or retribution, no shame, no blame, no revenge. Conversations can produce solutions, but it needs to be about shared solutions, hybrids, not just an inclusion and now becoming part of what you already have. There needs to possibly be hybrids. There needs to be new pairs. But even if you do want to go into that, that's okay. If we look at the different sports systems, there's an indigenous sports system that culminates in the ultimate high performance level of the Olympics the Winter Olympics just ending this past weekend. But there's on the indigenous side, there is now the World Indigenous Games. So there's North American Indigenous Games. If you wanted to stay on that path, that's okay. If you want to cross over into the Olympic side, that's okay. Maybe we should even have a third stream of sporting events where there's again coming together of new events that people haven't been involved. The Arctic Winter Games. The Arctic Winter Games have activities that no one else does. They are specific and a little bit exclusionary to the idea that you must be Indigenous, you must be part of an Arctic community from those territories in certain areas to participate in them. Why not make a hybrid games where there is now open to people who are interested in maybe doing and try challenge themselves within those realms? We need to work together to work that out. Shared solutions that utilize successful existing approaches from multiple sources of wisdom. I think I already mentioned that and used that, but it merits being said again. You're searching for new ways of thinking that we can all build on. It's not linear. It's not a process. It's a process, not a checkbox. So we must work together. There is work to be done on three sides. I can't say that enough. No blame, no shame, no revenge, which I already just mentioned. I love this, knowing about Nelson Mandela. As I stand before the door to my freedom, I realize that if I do not leave my pain, anger, and bitterness behind me, I will still be in prison. That's part of the healing journey that needs to happen. There must be a change of perspective about the way in which Indigenous people would be engaged with Canadian society in the quest for reconciliation. We cannot perpetuate the paternalistic concept that only Indigenous people are in need of healing. I would reference back to the people who have experienced a blanket activity and felt ashamed, felt angry about the history that they would know, history that has been hidden, the voice, the stories that were hidden, and in some ways still sometimes continue to be hidden throughout time. More food for thought. So why plus who equals what and how? Why plus who on the left side equals what and how on the right side. I've shared some stories and thoughts on the left side about the why maybe we do things. Why do we think this way we do? Who has it impacted? Who is involved in this? I've also provided some suggestions for what might be done on the right-hand side. I don't say the right side, the right-hand side. A little bit of what could be done. Suggestions, but not telling you that this is what must be done. Because again, within Indigenous culture, you are not told how to live your life, but that doesn't mean that there isn't guidance, there isn't structure, there isn't traditions, ways of doing. It just means that your choice with how you choose to pursue your enjoyment and pursue your gifts is your choice. Your challenge, everyone out there listening today, how do I get involved? How do I start? How do I make it more comfortable? Your challenge is to establish your new comfort zone that will inform the how to create a good way. So that kind of is a synopsis of my discussion today. Not quite to the end, got a couple of things to share with you still. I'd mentioned there's no absolute right or wrong within Indigenous languages. Their translations don't exist. It's actually, that's why we use the idea of a good path or a good way. A good mind, a good heart. A good mind is an open mind. A good heart is one that has trust, integrity, and respect. Existence in life occurs in cycles. The only constant within the world is actually change. We need to be able to adapt and adjust a little bit better. I think the pandemic has made us a little bit, hopefully we realize that we weren't as, our world systems institutions aren't as adaptable as they are because they tend towards a more corporate model of we all need to be homogeneous because that's the most efficient. That's the best path to greater wealth. Being prepared to change and adapt, seeking a good way. And water is life, water is resilient, water finds a way. During the TRC work 6 years, and I come back to this one because it speaks to me so much, there were witnesses, 6,000 of them, whose role was to bear official witness to the testimonies of survivors and their families, former school staff and their descendants, government and church officials, and any others whose lives have been affected by the residential schools. And for non-Indigenous Canadians who came to bear witness to survivors' life stories, the people I just mentioned above, the experience was powerful, but there was one woman's sharing of what she was thinking. She shared what was in her mind, and she simply said, by listening to your story, my story can change. By listening to your story, I can change. I continue coming back to that. And with that, I thank you for your respect for listening and sharing. There's my information. I'll leave it up on the screen for a moment, and that's it. My apologies for being done, but that took me an hour from when I came on board. Now we'll go